3. Terrence Ross just did this over the Manimal.
Oh, Canada. Oh, Canada. Oh, Canada.
What is happening, Raptorland? Sean back here with you for a special edition of the Raptors Wrap Up. This is the NBA Trade Deadline Roundup Edition. Let's get right to it with the biggest move of the day. Evan Turner and Lavoy Allen going to the Pacers, with Danny Granger headed back to the Sixers. I really like this move for Indiana. They managed to upgrade their sixth-man scoring spot while not taking on any money for next season. This was key because the Pacers' only trade asset was really Danny Granger's $14 million expiring deal, but in order to re-sign Lance Stevenson, which is their top priority in the offseason, they had to make sure that they weren't taking on any money for next season, and this made a lot of deals difficult to pull off. This put them in an interesting situation as they are clearly in a win-now mentality and want to beat Miami this year. So managing to upgrade from a rusty and struggling Danny Granger to Evan Turner, who no longer has to worry about carrying an offense as he did in Philly, and can simply worry about bringing energy and scoring off the bench for the second unit, and simply just playing perimeter D like they like to do in Indiana, is going to be good for him. It also didn't hurt to add Lavoy Allen for the remainder of the season as insurance in case any other big men go down. So overall, this was a huge coup for Indiana as they prepare to do battle with Miami come the spring. The Washington Wizards made their move as they added veteran point guard Andre Miller. Jan Vesely went to Denver, and Eric Maynor and 2 second-round picks to the Sixers, a common theme that you'll see today. With Eric Maynor falling out of favor in Washington and Garrett Temple simply not providing what they need from the backup point guard spot, Washington decided that they needed to add a well-qualified backup one and a much-needed veteran presence in the backcourt by adding Andre Miller. The move solidifies what we already knew, which is that Washington is done with losing and are making a move to try and win in the playoffs now. By only giving up failed lottery pick Jan Vesely and a second rounder, it's a low-risk move for the Wizards, and maybe Miller can pass on some of his wisdom and experience to young franchise point guard John Wall. For Denver, they could take a flyer on a once promising high pick in Vesely while shedding themselves of a player they didn't even want around the team in Andre Miller after clashing with coaches early in the season. And for Philly, by taking on Eric Maynor and the $2.1 million player option he's likely to exercise for next season, they get 2 second-round picks for helping to facilitate the trade. The Cleveland Cavaliers continue their push towards the playoffs as they acquired Spencer Hawes in exchange for Earl Clark, Henry Sims, and 2 second-round picks, once again, of course, going to Philly. The Cavs simply will not give up on this season, and with a surprising 6-game winning streak, they've decided to go all in by adding a quality center in the form of Spencer Hawes as a rental player. Despite having some young front court pieces, the Cavs are thin at center behind injury-prone, and you guessed it, currently injured Anderson Varejao. This move underlines the Cavs' desperation to make the playoffs as they just fired their GM Chris Grant a few weeks ago. To bring the focus back to the Raptors for a minute, I really would have liked to have seen Toronto get in on Hawes. Clearly, Masai Ujiri didn't want to overextend himself, but at the cost of a few second-round picks and players used to match salaries, clearly Hawes was there for the taking. As was evidenced from the game against the Bulls, Jonas Valanciunas is still an inconsistent player, and he struggles in high-intensity physical games. A veteran quality presence in Hawes would have been a nice piece for a young Raptors team looking to grow and gain valuable experience in the playoffs. Philly was eager to unload any and all expiring assets that they did not plan on bringing back next season, and though their goal was to obtain a first-rounder, they settled on 2 second-rounders and players to make the numbers work. Everyone around the league knew that the Sixers wanted to get rid of these expiring assets, and they simply took what they could get for Hawes and Turner. Charlotte continues their push towards the playoffs as they add Gary Neal and Luke Ridnour in exchange for Ramon Sessions and Jeff Adrian going back to Milwaukee. Charlotte shores up their point guard spot by adding Gary Neal, who never found a fit in Milwaukee after being signed this past offseason. Charlotte, much like Cleveland, is tired of losing and decided to take on a little bit more money by also adding Ridnour, who can still play and adds veteran point guard depth to a young team who needs it. Charlotte has clearly decided that they need to change their losing culture and make the playoffs this season, as they currently sit in 8th place in the East under surprising first-year head coach Steve Clifford despite a deep draft class. As for Milwaukee, they get a solid point guard in Ramon Sessions to shake up the 1 spot after a dismal season, and managed to shed a bit of salary and players that just didn't seem to fit in their future as they stay the course to try and land the number 1 pick in the upcoming draft. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the Raptors trade, no matter how minor it was, as they picked up point guard Nando De Colo from San Antonio in exchange for little-used Austin Daye. The Raptors' loan move was a minor one, picking up the 26-year-old point guard. It's an interesting acquisition as the Raptors already have Dwight Bikes and Julian Stone for their young point guard depth, so Ujiri clearly must have seen something in the little-used De Colo. In Daye, the Spurs acquired depth on the wing where they needed much more than at the point guard spot, where they already have Canadian Corey Joseph and Patty Mills, who has been playing really well in the recent absence of Tony Parker. The former Gonzaga standout and first-round pick in Daye only appeared in 8 games for the Raptors and was clearly not in their plans moving forward. Death, taxes, and a trade deadline move made by the Rockets, all things you can count on, as Houston acquired Jordan Hamilton in exchange for Aaron Brooks going to Denver. It wouldn't be an NBA trade deadline if Daryl Morey and the Houston Rockets didn't make a move, as this is the 7th year in a row they've made a trade at the deadline, this time acquiring impending free agent Jordan Hamilton. Hamilton is a young athletic wing with upside who was a first-round pick just 3 years ago. He probably won't get much run, but he's a good insurance pickup and certainly worth the flyer based on his previous potential. In Aaron Brooks, the Nuggets get a replacement for the exiled Andre Miller and Nate Robinson, who is out for the year. You know the story on Brooks by now. He's small, he doesn't play much defense, but he can light it up on occasion. Brooks wasn't getting much playing time behind Jeremy Lin and Patrick Beverley, and he actually had to approve of this trade, which really says something as Houston is headed towards a surefire playoff berth and potentially a deep playoff run, while Denver is not going to the playoffs this spring. Brooks is also an impending free agent. I also just wanted to touch on 2 trades that happened on Wednesday because they were important. The Golden State Warriors acquired Steve Blake from the Lakers in exchange for Kent Bazemore and Marshawn Brooks. The Warriors grabbed the backup point guard that they've coveted in the form of Steve Blake, a real gamer and a guy they can go to war with in the playoffs, something that they've desperately needed. The Lakers were in full sell mode going into the deadline, and there were rumors of if they would trade Jordan Hill, which somehow didn't happen, and Pau Gasol, who they decided to keep. Steve Blake was the only player they actually did manage to trade. In the process, they managed to save about $4 million in luxury tax and add a couple young rotation players that they can get a good look at for the rest of the season. I also wanted to touch on what the Raptors did at the deadline. Masai Ujiri was in a very interesting position. He made trades earlier, and he found that he has a team that, while not great, is a good solid team that's going to make the playoffs, but more importantly, they have a chemistry, they enjoy playing together and playing for one another. So it was going to be hard to break up this team to bring in an asset and disrupt the chemistry, but Ujiri clearly doesn't think that this Raptors team can make it to the next level, so he doesn't want to overextend himself and overpay for, say, a Rajon Rondo. That is why he even still looked at potentially trading Kyle Lowry if he could get enough back from the Knicks, like, say, Tim Hardaway Jr. in a first-round pick or something to that effect. But the problem with that also would have been that if you traded Lowry, you would have needed to get a point guard back, because it wouldn't have looked good if the Raptors played this hard, were the Atlantic Division leaders, and then it looked like you punted by trading Lowry. You would at that point have to bring in another starting point guard, and there just wasn't enough time to do that. He wasn't going to overpay Rondo, who doesn't want to sign long-term. They don't like Jeff Teague enough, so they weren't going to bring him in. So he was just kind of hamstrung in the moves he could make. They decided to stand pat, at least with this, It looks like he trusts the guys, he is rewarding them for their play, and they're just going to see how they can do. He can make moves in the offseason to really set up for next season. So Ujiri was in a difficult predicament as he couldn't punt this season, but he didn't want to overextend himself as he didn't think the team was quite there to really make a run for this playoffs. So that is why in the end I think he just decided to stand pat. So that is going to do it for this edition of the Raptors Wrap Up. Follow me on Twitter at Raptors Wrap Up, where I live tweet games and give my thoughts on everything going on around the NBA. If you have any questions or things you'd like me to incorporate into this vlog, just let me know in the comments and I'll try and do that. Thanks for watching.